Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes. Today I am delighted to be joined by JP Mason, and it took me all game last night to come up with that headline, JP, so I hope you like it. I think once again, here we are. We need to talk about what's happening in front of our eyes, JP. I keep getting asked on the Facebook group, come on, Paul, talk about the positives, and I keep asking, where are they? Oh, well, the positive is we narrowed the gap by 1 point last night. That's it. Absolutely shambolic, but if you listen to Neil Lennon, there is no shambles, there is no crisis. Where are we, JP, since last week when we last spoke to you?
Well, on the football side of things, we're a point out of those the 3 games in hand where we're supposedly going to win all 3, and that, in theory, that was the idea. But away to Livingston, a place we've not won since 2006. Is that the right stat? Is that correct?
That's astonishing if that's the stat. That's shocking, eh?
I think it is.
Shocking.
I'm sure I heard that bandied about, and obviously I don't think Neil Lennon has ever won as a manager there, which is also pretty shocking considering surely the amount of games. Mind you, I guess Livingston were away from the top flight for a while and have only come back in recent years. But it's quite startling. I think on the football side of things, the way things went on Saturday against Livingston, Rogic up front was just not. It was a horrible game to watch. I said to a friend who's a Livingston fan this morning on a text that it's probably one of the worst games I've ever watched. I think all things considered, watching it at home, in my flat on my own, watching an empty stadium, watching that Celtic side with Gavin Strachan in charge in a season where we're going for 10 titles in a row, is almost completely surreal. You've got to take a step back and go, is this actually happening? Like what? Yeah. We
were revelling in the despair of the Graham Murty period, I guess, at Rangers. We're in that period ourselves. And the big thing for me as well is, we're very defensive about Celtic Football Club. So I get when people don't like it when the club are being criticised by other fans, but where else can you go with this one, JP? You've got to pick out what's going wrong. You've got to criticise the right people. And as I was saying last night, I think we all agree, we all realise that there are bigger changes required at Celtic Football Club. A lot of the issues that Neil Lennon's facing is due to larger, bigger issues at the club, and we get that. But the only change that can be made at the moment is you can maybe tinker with the squad a little bit in January, and I say a little bit because I don't think we're in a position to go out and buy 3 or 4 players, and what would the point be unless you had a new manager in place? And then the other thing that can be changed immediately is obviously the management and coaching setup. So when you talk about doing that, that's with a view to next season. We've all accepted defeat, I think it's safe to say, except for Neil Lennon. We've accepted defeat this season. We came out last night and he thinks that finally we're not going to catch Rangers. But we've seen it for weeks and months. So there's one thing, not knowing when you're beat, and that can be, that could be something that is, admirable. JP, you don't know when you're beat, you keep going, you show determination, etc. But there also needs to be an element of self-awareness where you say, this isn't good for me, it's not good for the club. But he has already stated the club are going to have to sack him if they want him to go. He will not walk. Now, if that's the case, does that change your view of Neil Lennon? What he's done for Celtic? Neil Lennon as a person, as a Celtic icon?
See, I was thinking about this this morning, really, and I thought, I knew you were going to ask me about this, and I think Amy and Colin mentioned yesterday about this sort of, is there an emotional attachment from the board to Neil Lennon based on what he's done as a player and a manager for Celtic so far? I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it might be that they don't have a plan B ready in place and they're not prepared to go with the Gavin Strachan and John Kennedy short-term option. But in terms of how I feel about Neil Lennon, my relationship with Neil Lennon is obviously as a fan. I don't know the guy, but if I take it back to the very start of when Neil Lennon signed for Celtic, I was so excited about Neil Lennon signing for Celtic that I had the home top that season would be the 2000-2001 season, and I went out and got Lennon 18 on the back of the top. Right now, I could have got anybody that season. Remember all the players we had in that team at that time, but I was so excited about Neil Lennon, basically because he was always brilliant in Championship Manager. As a player, like if you got Neil Lennon in Championship Manager, then he was always great. So, and the fact that he was Irish and that he was, Martin O'Neill's guy and everything like that. But when I went to get the name on the back, the guys in the shop were like, "Oh, we don't have any Scottish Premiership L's left, for the L." And I said, he said, "I've got English Premiership left, then would you take that instead of the Scottish one?" I was like, "It doesn't matter, I'll just take the English one." I said, "How have you run out of L's?" And he went, "Quite a lot of Rangers fans have been in buying tops with Flo on the back, 3 letters, the cheap option." And I thought that was amusing. I've always remembered that moment.
I wonder where all the jerseys went.
Well, I still have my Lennon top. It's actually with my friend at the moment who started a framing shirt business, and he asked for a loan of some of my tops to, because he's a Rangers fan, and he asked for a loan of some of my tops to show the other side of the fence, so to speak. So he's got that at the moment, and it's signed by Neil Lennon because he came to the Tommy Burns supper that my old supporters club used to run at the TV at Banqueting Hall in Edinburgh, the Heriot Watt and Edinburgh University's Celtic Supporters Club. So Lennon came as a guest to that, but obviously Tommy Burns was part of he was in charge of the youth development at that time, because Neil retained them. So Tommy Burns would bring a guest, and he'd managed to bring Neil Lennon, and we were all absolutely delighted that Neil Lennon was going to be the guest. So he came as the guest, and I ran up to the top table with my top, and I was like, "Neil, absolutely delighted you're here at the club. I was at your debut at Dens Park," and he was like, "Oh, great." And when I signed the top, best wishes, Neil Lennon 18. And then I was in Seville, and I thought Neil Lennon was one of the best players in the park that night, in Seville. And when you've been in a ground and you've witnessed a play, it's like when you go to a gig and you're with a band in a moment, that moment can't be repeated. So when you go to a game and you're in that moment and you're in the ground, that moment can't be repeated. So it feels like you've got a connection. And then I've been with them in various other, loads of other games, every single game home and away in the Martin O'Neill treble season. Domestically, I was at every single game. So, I saw him play, loads of games. And then I was there the night he was attacked at Tynecastle. I was there in the ground that night, and that was a horrible, horrible thing. It was a poisonous atmosphere. You could almost feel it coming. I didn't expect maybe a fan to attack him, but I thought there was going to be bother that night, and you could sense it in the air, and then that happened. And so you feel like an affinity with him. And then my friend Michael and I were travelling to Paris for the ill-fated 7-1 PSG game, and met Neil Lennon in duty free. We were just walking through, and we were walking behind him, and we went up to him, and he kind of went, "Are you guys going over?" Aye? And we were like, "Aye." He just kind of looked at us as if to say, "Oh, we're going to get hammered," type thing. and we got a picture with him, and he was perfectly sound. And I've seen him, obviously, as people know, he drinks in Tennant's Bar, which is just down the road from my flat. And I've seen him in there a couple of times. I've never approached him, just left him to his own devices in there, because I'm sure he gets a lot bothered, and that's maybe a place he likes to go for a bit of respite. And it's maybe not somewhere that you would expect a Celtic manager to drink. But
see, the big thing with that, you're absolutely right. Some respite because of the way he's been treated as a player and as a manager. So when some Celtic fans say that it's wrong to criticise him, it's wrong to pile up on him and things like that, it's due to the fact that there is a loyalty. There is a loyalty to Neil Lennon because of what he's been through. Not just because of the success that he's had as a player and as a manager, but because of what he's been through. I mean, the threats, bullets in the post, attacked in the street, it goes on and on, attacked in a stadium, it goes on and on. And I remember I was in London when he was hit by a coin Now, he was a manager of Hibs. They were playing Hearts. Mm-hmm. It might have been at Tynecastle, I think, again. Yeah. And that night, I'm listening to the game. Celtic were playing Dundee at Dens Park that night. And I was listening to the game. And after the game, Gary Caldwell, ex-teammate of Lenny's, criticised Lenny and said he brings it on himself. I remember him saying it. And the tweet will be out there somewhere, obviously. But, I'm standing up for Lenny. Even though he's a Hibs gaffer, JP, you had this affinity. You have this affinity with Neil Lennon. I'm talking in the past tense as if a decision's been made. It feels as though last night was just the end, and people were saying, Neil himself yesterday was saying, it was only a month ago that I won a treble. And yeah, I absolutely get that. It was exactly 1 month ago yesterday, the 20th of December. But in this season of all seasons, I need to keep reminding myself that we contributed just 2 games to that quadruple treble this season. We only contributed 2 games. And in those 2 games, some of the issues that have completely ruined our season were evident. So you've seen the second half, not a capitulation, but you've seen the second half flatlining of the tempo, if you like. We've been critical of the fitness of the Celtic side. Pretty poor in the second half of a lot of games. That happened against Aberdeen. Funnily enough, last night we're up 2-1 at half-time and we drop it in the second half. That's happened a lot this season. And then obviously the second game being the Hearts final, JP, whereby we're playing a club in the Championship. People say, but they're not a Championship club. A club in the Championship who might have a bigger budget than everybody else, because you would expect them to be in the Premier League, and I'm pretty sure they'll be back soon enough. But, they took us to extra time. They looked the most likely to win in the extra time period. We win it on penalties. So, yeah, unbelievable achievement. Lenny's played a massive part now, of course he has. But this season, we've only contributed 2 games to that unbelievable achievement. And the rest has been pretty dismal. So it is hard to put a nice positive glean on that. But I want people to realise it's not because you have a vendetta against Neil Lennon. Absolutely not. Because even when he was at Bolton, I looked out for his results. When he was at Hibs, as I've said a couple of times in the last few weeks, I had the privilege of interviewing Neil Lennon, and he told us after the event, off camera, that he will be back at Celtic Park as manager one day. Him and his agent alluded to that. So you kind of expected it. I remember the reception he got when he walked out in front of the Royal Concert Hall, where I think it holds something like 1,500, JP, and they all gave him a standing ovation, because, and they probably started chanting his name as well. But on the flip side of that, the night before the Scottish Cup final against Hearts, first time round, the treble, where he's the interim manager, and everybody's asking the question around about that time, what happens if we win? Does Lenny get the job? I said on the podcast, well, he needs to get the job. He come in our time of needs after Brendan Rodgers walked out on us unceremoniously, and he came in and he done what we had to do. He galvanised the team. He's good at, he was obviously good at that. I think the problem, and I'll get onto that, is he's kind of beyond that now, JP, and I think a big part of that was the fallout of the Ferencváros game, whereby he has tried to get a reaction out of certain people in that dressing room by calling them out. Not by name, but there's players in that dressing room who don't want to be here. And that backfired on him. Now, people talk about losing the dressing room. And when you're speaking to ex-players, I ask them, what does that mean? And it does happen. Of course it does. I mean, we've spoken time and time again about what happened with Ronnie Dyler. All it takes is 4, 5, maybe 6 senior players not to buy in to the person or their philosophy, and that spreads throughout the team. Do you think, and I know we've had other people on the podcast this season, like Anthony from Four Tims, who after the 2-0 defeat at Celtic Park to Rangers said that Neil Lennon should walk or be sacked at that time. And I said, I felt it was too early at that point. But Ferencváros comes along, and now with hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight, that may have been the moment, JP, where he's lost that dressing room. Because people look back at last season, you look at some of the performances, it can't all be the kind of after effects of a brilliantly working machine that Brendan Rodgers set up and it still runs for a year. Surely Lenny had a part to play, of course he did, in the treble. So I think what's happened is there's been a real tipping point within the playing staff, and I believe it would be the Ferencváros one, because there really has been since then a demise in the performances and individuals basically disappearing from view. Edouard being a prime example, he's had a really poor season. What do you think? Is there a moment that you can pinpoint in this season, if I asked you, where did it all go wrong?
the biggest one probably is that moment where he said that after the game about there's players in there that don't want to be at the club anymore, and they're looking, they're agitating for a move or whatever. And then he was pushed and said, have people actually come and said that to you? And he said, yeah, they have. And I remember sitting here just going, oh no, that is far too much information to be out there in the public domain, like especially that type of information. It's pretty sensitive information. It's not, it then throws into question amongst the support, who's he talking about? And then all of a sudden all the players are all going, well, obviously there's no fans there, so nobody can sort of vent their anger at a game or anything like that. But it's the reverse of that is social media, where people are all questioning who it is on social media and everything else, which is horrible. That's the domain that we have to it's great having this, but doing this but without the outlet of going to the games is quite harmful. I think not harmful, but it's not as enjoyable as if you were actually at the game and you could talk about things that happened at the game, your experience of the game. You're just sitting watching it on your own in your flat. So I think that moment when he said that was just like, that was alarm bells big time. I don't know if it necessarily made me go, well, we should definitely go at this point, because we had the Europa League as a kind of safety net, if you want to call it that, but then it turned out to be anything but a safety net. We fell completely through that safety net, if it was one, with the way that things went in that campaign. But yeah, I think holding on to these players, whoever they are, that didn't want to be there after the summer, that's proved to be such a big factor, I think, in all of this. I think.
Without a doubt. Now, I'm going to dip in and out of the comments as we go along, because going back to something you said there, JP, the going to the match experience, it's something that obviously for generations has been passed down from grandfather to father and so on. And I look back on my dad a lot of the time, especially in my older age. I look back on these experiences, and the fact that football game at the weekend gave someone whose life probably was, just pretty grim. My old man worked down the pit. He was a pit man. That's a grim existence, 12-hour shifts underground in horrible conditions. But then at the weekend, you had this release. You had the release, and what went with that obviously was travelling on the supporters' buses, having a drink or two with your comrades, etc. And the football was a release, and it was a release of all the emotions and all the frustrations, but also the joy that you get from watching Celtic. And we've not had that. And I think what's happened this season, JP, is we haven't been able to release any of that frustration. We haven't been able to vent anything. And unfortunately what's happened is, a lot of the stuff you're seeing online is pretty toxic. And I think a big part of that is we're not going to the games. We're not able to release the frustrations and the joy and the emotion. And I have heard quite a few times people saying, we've been worse off this season because the fans play a much bigger part. They're far more influential at Celtic than at other clubs. I totally get that. But I do think it's a mitigating circumstance in amongst all the other things that have been done wrong and have gone wrong for Celtic this season. Yeah. But one of the things I've been disappointed in and I keep bringing it up, but it's been the communication and the engagement from the club itself. The silence from Celtic Football Club is deafening. And again, people constantly say, well, why would you speak to this broadcaster or that channel? Well, bottom line of that is, if you do speak to them, the club get to know what you've said. And, within the days of someone perhaps putting out a message, sometimes the club do respond. And we've had statements, and I'm not saying it's because of me, we've had statements from the club, one-way statements, JP, where, if you already feel kind of isolated as a fan, they just make you feel even more isolated. So everything that's going on, and we're waiting for the results of this review. In the crowd on YouTube says the silence from Celtic Football Club is deafening. How disappointing has that been this season? And is there anything they can do to try and repair that?
I think they're in the middle of an absolute PR disaster, really, with the way that the fact that they didn't report any of Neil Lennon's press conference the other day was pretty telling and quite startling, actually. When I was looking through to see if there was anything been posted, and they hadn't posted anything, I was just like, wow, that's That's pretty worrying. I mean, you then start to worry is there a complete breakdown between management and boardroom level or whatever, a la Brendan Rodgers, Terminado, all of that kind of stuff, I'd forgotten about that interview actually, but you brought it up a couple of times, and I do remember it. I remember it very well. And was it around about the time of the Valencia game? Was it at or around about that time?
I'll probably have a look back on that, JP, because it is so telling now when you look back. The messages were there.
It was basically him showing his hand a little bit. I mean, he didn't show his hand a lot, Brendan Rodgers, but he definitely showed his hand a little bit that night. But I think that the PR side of things, I mean, I feel disconnected from the club, but more so because I'm not at the ground and going to the games and all the rest of it. The actual communication, it just leads to speculation and, is the word conjecture? I don't know. Is that the right word to use?
Absolutely. Yep.
From the fans as to what's going on, because no one really knows. Everyone's just kind of going, okay, well, they're clearly sticking by Lennon, but I think it's because they don't have a plan B, and therefore they're scared probably to put out stuff that they can't back up.
Well, it's interesting that there's a 22-minute interview that obviously was ran by the club. It was the club's media and PR team that set it up and controlled it. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones who are allowing X, Y and Z to speak. They're the ones who, if necessary, would step in. And I felt that they probably should have stepped in at some stage. And they did, JP. They had an opportunity. So I think about midway through that interview, there were some kind of connectivity issues, right? Mm-hmm. Apparently. Mm-hmm. And that gave a wee breather in the middle of the interview for the PR officer to come in and speak to Neil Lennon. Now, you don't see, because the PR officer's back is to the camera, and he's speaking directly to Neil Lennon. And he's obviously breaking the news that, by the way, Neil, we've just had a second casualty here. There's a second player got COVID. Mm-hmm. And then the PR officer leaves the screen. Incredibly, the connection's back up and running, and then they can get back into the interview.
Well, I've not seen it, so I didn't know that that's what actually happens, but that's crazy.
That's what's, and it was car crash stuff. Mm-hmm. So I've said to Colin a few times, in defence of Neil Lennon, by the way, mm-hmm. it was wrong to drop that bombshell midway through that. Neil Lennon would never have known, right? I mean, were they, unless the club released it, the press pack would never have known during the interview. It's only 20 minutes long. And then afterwards, the club could have followed it up with a statement saying, during Neil Lennon's interview, this has been found, Yeah. But to do that, and I just think that it did actually contribute to the way that interview went. Mm. I mean, we've all seen the last seconds of it where he talks about a barrage of hypocrisy. Mm. As soon as he said that, Neil Lennon stormed out. He stormed out, and someone's still trying to ask him questions. But no wonder that he was rattled, is what I would say. Because, on the one hand, I say, well, he had 2 weeks to prepare for the interview, JP. So you're going through everything in your mind, and if you can remain composed and hopefully go through what you want to say, that's one thing. He didn't actually open up. His opening salvo was to demand an apology. That's the way that he approached it. But I don't think it helped. And I don't think, in the crowd makes a point there. The silence from CFC is deafening. We've got to hold everybody to account, and I just think that there's certain things we could have done so much better to assist Neil Lennon as well. But you know what? I think we're beyond it now. So last night, Neil Lennon's come out and said, I'm not going to walk. Again, as you say, it leads to speculation. Oh, it's because he's on a rolling contract and he wants a payout, and if he walks, he waives it, etc., etc. I mean, it doesn't take out, a genius to work that out. But that's not the sole reason.
Absolutely. And is that the reason?
It's not the sole reason.
It's not about money. There's no way he's holding off purely for monetary reasons. He's holding off because he is bullish, and he is, the type of guy that will go down fighting. He's not the type of guy that will just go, oh, well, it's clearly not worked out. I mean, last night's game, I know you covered it in length after the game on the reaction, but I mean, it was farcical that Livingston got their equaliser just at the point where the snow was starting to lie, and then from that point on, said to my mate this morning, the Livingston fan who was looking for a reaction from me. He's not that much a needly guy, you know. He's a good pal, a really good pal, but he was obviously texting, just going, "Oh, I thought we should have won on Saturday." And you know, last night, you know, and Beaton's goal was offside, and it was a mile offside. He said, and I was like, I'd hardly call it a mile offside, marginal. But you know, when the snow started to lie, it was just like, this is a joke, man. We need a goal. We need to win this game. We're playing against a shadow, so to speak, Livingston side, and we're just not going to be able to play our game. And the only way I could see a goal happening in that game between either side, as the snow started to lay on the pitch, was if somebody made a mistake. And I was just waiting for somebody falling, and it being the last man, and you know, Duffy or Beaton falling, and then them just running through and rounding Barcast and scoring, and that being the sort of the ultimate insult. It also reminded me, do you remember the Falkirk Celtic game from years ago at Brockville, 3-2? In the snow, where we got an orange ball out and all that. I was at that game, 92, I think it was, and it finished Celtic 3, Falkirk 2.
I'm trying to think of the goal scorers, because I do remember around about that time. Remember the 5-4 game at Brockville? I remember.
There was a 5-4 game, which was just in an afternoon, and there was no bad weather. But there was the 3-2 game. It was midweek, and I went to the game. I was in the Falkirk end. I hold my hands up. I was in the Falkirk end, obviously supporting Celtic. I used to go to Falkirk games as well with my pal and his dad when they were in the first division. And the Celtic team that day was Bonner, Boyd, Vodovchik, O'Neill, Mowbray, Gillespie, Slater, McStay, Craney, Nicholas, and Collins. That was the team. And the scorers were Mowbray, Craney, and Brian O'Neill. Brian O'Neill.
Was he playing as a makeshift centre forward or centre half that day? You just never knew with Brian O'Neill.
In the Charlie Mulgrew role. I just remember that game in the orange ball, and I was watching that last night, just going, like, is this game going to get called off? You could see the trail of the ball when it was, you know, and then it was just, obviously they wanted to let the game go because it had gone too far, and, you know, both teams had scored and everything, so they were just letting it play out. But it seemed to sum up this absolute farce of a season that, you know, we're desperately needing a goal. And yes, he throws on Frimpong and Scott Brown, which I don't really understand the Scott Brown going on as a substitute. And he gave him a wee tap on the head. Did you see that? He gave him a wee tap on the head in the dugout as if to say, "Come on, son, you know, go on and, like, you know, lead us to a victory." And he went on and inexplicably got himself sent off. You're just like, what? Oh, man.
See, the thing with that, I was a wee bit concerned looking at the fact that it all comes down to whether or not you can see the lines on the park, and it was getting to that stage where you weren't, certainly from viewing it on the TV, you couldn't really see them that well. Someone made the point, it might have been Andy Walker actually, that there wasn't much lines in the Livingston box. It was the snow was lying, which kind of showed you where we were in the game. But I did notice that wee tap on the head by Lennon to Brown, and I often wonder about the relationship between the two of them, because, you know, thinking back to the very first interview Scott Brown gave when Neil Lennon took over, and he was very complimentary about Brendan Rodgers, but then he said, you know, but Neil Lennon's also an excellent coach. But I think what we had seen with Scott Brown as a development, particularly under Brendan Rodgers, whereby, you know, I would challenge anyone to say that, you know, this time last year, anyone would say he wasn't a Celtic legend. He wasn't a great Celtic captain, everything that he'd achieved. So when I see a lot of the kind of fallout of last night, I just don't buy that. Yes, he's not the player due to his age and where he is in terms of his physicality, JP, that he once was. But what I'm being frustrated with this season with Scott Brown, and we've seen it against Hibs at Easter Road, where he gave away that daft penalty, is that was a part of his game in his younger days. You'll remember a sending off against Barcelona, where you're just looking at him thinking, what are you doing, you know? But then it's been a... You know, but again, you've got to take that, because a lot of the time you've kind of relied on Brown being the guy that comes on and, you know, against Aberdeen up at Pittodrie, who was complaining when he was doing that wee jig and all that kind of stuff, or the Bruni and all that. So we've got to take that with the other element of his game. But unfortunately, it's crept in a couple of times this season. I mean, here's an example, right? So he headers the ball in the Scottish Cup final. It comes out, wee Griffiths instinctively puts it in the net, and he's given them dogs abuse. Now, as a Celtic fan, at no point did I say, that really lacks class, JP, you know. I was like, get it up them, right? So it gives you that. But then the flip side of that has been these daft wee moments this season that have crept in. Do you think it's frustration? Do you think he's frustrated at the way that things are going with the club, but maybe also with himself? Because he's lost his jersey.
Yeah, I think he's bound to be frustrated because he does love playing for Celtic. He loves playing football, full stop. And, you know, everything I've read from his interviews and seen in his interviews, he loves the actual ceremony of going in to Lennoxtown and training. And I totally get that. I totally understand that because I'm the same in my job when I'm allowed to do it, you know, at DF. You know, I love going into work. I love, you know, saying all right to people I work with in King Tut's and going to my office and sitting down and doing my emails and planning the gigs and everything. I love that, you know, and, you know, if that was on the verge of being taken away from me, which it has been at the moment, and I've been extremely frustrated. I haven't been going out and like body checking people in the street and elbowing them and things like that. But, I'd be arrested. But I understand his frustration at his position right now at the club because it is, you know, it's sadly it will be over soon, and he has to make a decision about when that will be. I don't understand his thought process on last night because he does stop to actually allow the guy to run towards him, and then he makes the movement, and you're like, why do that? You know, it's the whole raising your profile. Here I go, raising your profile to the referee to, you know, to basically make him make a decision, and some people will say, oh, it should have been a yellow. It was a red card. I hate saying that because I love Scott Brown. I've met him a couple of times as well, and he's brilliant banter. But that was a red card, and it was so stupid. I don't think it cost us the game. I think our play and the conditions cost us the game. I don't think that one moment would be like, it was too late in the game anyway to cost us the game. If it happened after with half an hour to go or something, then there'd be even more raging. But nah, it was. I think he's just frustrated, and it'd be horrible to think of his career just whimpering out, you know, and it looks like that's going to happen potentially. And you know, I just hope that he's remembered for the many, many good things that he's done as opposed to this.
Absolutely. I keep going on about the appearances. You know, he's made over 600 appearances for Celtic. And there's a select few who are in that table. The only 12 have made over 500, JP. And it's the greats, you know, the real greats of Celtic Park. And he's in that group. And, you know, even if his performances tail off between now and the end of the season, or, you know, they go the same way as we've seen them last night, I'm still going to look at Scott Brown as an absolute icon of Celtic Football Club. But in the back of my mind also, I always thought that Scott Brown would remain at the club beyond being a player. I know that, you know, he's already done a bit of work at the club with some of the development sides. He's gone through his badges. We had someone in here, I forget who it was, who went through the course with Scott Brown. And so he's obviously got an eye on the coaching side. And I do like when it works, the boot room mentality that obviously Liverpool were famous for back in the day, and Celtic were as well. When you look at even the Steen years, you know, everybody there was a Celtic player, an ex-Celtic player that come through, Neil Lennon, Sean Fallon, and it's part of that, you know, getting everybody, particularly these days when you're bringing people from all over the globe, although that might change, getting people in and you know, getting them to understand what the club is and what the club means. Yeah. Because a lot of people have said this season, what does it matter to Edouard? What does 10 in a row mean to Edouard? Now, I understand the point, but I think there's a professionalism about a lot of these players that have come through French academies in that, JP, where they want to achieve. It doesn't matter if they're at Celtic or their next club or at Toulouse or PSG, they want to achieve. It's all about achievement. So I don't buy that entirely, that these guys don't. But what I would say is, do they want it as much as a Kieran Tierney? I doubt that very much. You know, did he want it as much as Scott Brown, who's been there for the 9 and he wants the 10? I doubt that very much. So I like to have figures at the club, and it gives you a continuity. You know, if a new management team comes in, it's always nice to have that familiarity. And I always thought Scott Brown would be that figure who moves from player to maybe coaching staff. Now, last night, I'm looking at that, another dreadful night. watching Celtic, looking at half time with Colin and Kevin, we're 2-1 up. You're thinking, yeah, we're going to get a result. This is great.
Take Ayer's chance just before half time. I mean, that was, I wouldn't say it was a sitter. Of course it wasn't. I mean, it was a good save by the keeper, but you go 3 up before half time, I would have said it's probably game over.
Definitely. 45 minutes on the clock, JP. Yeah. And I think the big man tired, actually. I think Ayer tired because there was moments in that game up and down the right hand side, the big galloping runs, unreal. And we've seen him at Fir Park, taking a chance like that. We've seen him at Pittodrie taking a chance like that. So I would have put my money on him scoring last night. Unfortunately, he didn't. But the second half this season has been an issue for Celtic. And I'm looking at Scott Brown and I'm thinking, right, we're now 20 points behind. Yes, we've got 2 games in hand, but as we know, if last night taught us anything, that's not a guaranteed 6 points. We've no wins this year. Are we entering into another one of these ruts that saw us win 2 and 12? And then inevitably you ask the question, Neil Lennon won't walk away. Will the club take the decision out of his hands? And that's a big question. I'm going to ask you that, JP, because a lot of people are resigned to the fact that we're going to stay as is until the end of the season. I don't know where we're going to benefit there. I really don't know as a club how we're going to benefit. We've used the season ticket renewal as a point where you think, well, change has to happen before then. Otherwise, a lot of people might be reluctant to renew. But what if that change is that Neil Lennon is removed from the manager's chair and we've got basically an interim team of bodies that are already there, like John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan, and the aforementioned Scott Brown might have come into that. Obviously, you've got McManus, you've got Adair, you've got McIntyre. So where do you think this is going to go in terms of the club? They have been quite quiet on the subject. We've got another week before we play a game. Do you think that this week might be the week where they come out and say, actually, we have concluded this review, and this is the result of that? Neil Lennon is no longer the Celtic manager.
Well, I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. They're either going to double down and be like, well, we're just going to we'll double down on our support for Neil Lennon because of the circumstances of the first 2 games. Well, not the first 2 games. The second and the third game of the year being majorly disrupted by the coronavirus self-isolation of the majority of the first team playing squad. Not the majority, but a decent amount of the first team playing squad. So I think they would if they're going that direction, they would probably factor that in. They would factor in at Ibrox that we were the better side, and then obviously the sending off, everything changed. They'll maybe look at that. But if they were being cold-blooded, they would definitely say we've concluded the review. Performances and results haven't been up to the standard that we expected, and as a result, this is what's going to happen. But it just depends on how they're going to look at it. It also depends what their plan B is, and I genuinely don't think that they have one. And see, just back to fine margins and things like that. I had a theory the other day about the Chris Julian injury. See that moment that he clattered the post?
I know.
Any faint hopes that we had of this title went that moment his knee hit that post, as far as I'm concerned, because that set in motion a chain of events that has led to us being in this debacle. Because if he hadn't got injured in that game, say they'd scored that goal and they'd won the game 2-1, we go into Ibrox with Julian and Ayer at centre half. Would that incident have happened with Beat? I know it's all ifs, buts and maybes, but it has to be looked at from source, and that's the source of that point. Would Julian have got turned like Beaton did? Would he have even been in the position to be turned like Beaton did? I don't know. And then you've got to look at the whole Julian moving seats on the bus thing. Did he move seats in the bus because of his injury? I don't know. No one knows because it's not been released. But there is a weird thing where he's moved seats, and they actually in the bus manifest they'll have had to say he was sitting in this seat and then he was sitting in this seat, and that's what's caused this supposed extra pollution of the squad. So it's just wild to think that. I know there was problems way before Julian hitting the post, but if there was going to be any hope at all, it went in that moment as far as I'm concerned. So
I think we'll focus on that when we're doing the end of season DVD, the Axom DVD that we're obviously going to do. It'll be quite a dramatic 45 minutes, that's for sure. We'll work through some of these comments coming in from regular posters via YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. So please, if you are watching on YouTube, subscribe, hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, because we do have a proportion of people who come on here, JP, who don't support Celtic, and they give us abuse down the comments, and they give us a thumbs down. So please support your Axon broadcast. Now, Stephen Kenneth, how many times have we heard our manager in interviews use the phrases "I don't know" for whatever reason? We can analyse it to death. The same man refutes suggestions it's a shambles or a crisis. Now, we use words shambolic, crisis, back in the day where people used to read newspapers and we saw the crest and it was crumbling and it was split and all this kind of stuff. We've been called entitled this season, JP, because you're not winning, you're throwing the toys at the pram and protesting at the Harris fencing and all that. It's much deeper than that. It really is much deeper than that. And I think one of the biggest frustrations for me is the signs have been there for some time that this was unravelling. I think it's really important to note the point you raised there about Julian Clark in that post, because, there might have been some miraculous recovery had that not happened, and then Forrest comes back and it's the old Celtic fairy tale. We know it's not going to happen this season. And there's so many occasions now, like in the 45th minute, Big Ayer, who's probably feeling it a bit because he's not been training to the same kind of high tempo, he's 1-on-1 and he misses. If that happened, but there's been too many ifs this season. In other seasons, all the ifs have been positives, and we don't even question it because of that. One of the things that's annoyed me a bit, I've got to say, is how Celtic have become all of a sudden a laughingstock, right? So we go to Dubai and we know what's happened, and we've gone over it and we've poured over it, and I don't think we've heard the last of that, especially with the government side of things, right, with John Swinney and his comments. So we'll need to just play that one by ear. So we obviously with the Dubai and the fallout of Dubai, I look at the way that that was kind of reported on the Spartak Moscow Twitter page, and they're basically poking fun at Celtic. Now, sometimes you see wee Twitter spats and it's really good humoured in that. You know what I mean, JP? And I've always said on this podcast that Celtic fans have a great sense of humour, but we can laugh at ourselves. But you're just thinking to yourself, we are turning into a bit of laughingstock. Last night, Livingston go 10 games unbeaten, so they give us the 10 in a row message on their Twitter page, and you're just thinking, right, fair enough, that's fine. St Johnstone come out and refute what Neil Lennon says. Hamilton refute what Neil Lennon says. The Deputy First Minister comes out and does the same. That, for me, we're getting to the realms of the club itself, the reputation of the club. I'm not going to call it a brand. I'm not a commercial guy. The club. I just think that when you look at the values of the club and you look at how you as a fan view the club, and we're always going about the fairy tale element and a club like no other, there's other Scottish clubs mocking us now. The government are mocking us. The Scottish government are basically refuting what our manager has said. Do you think there are wide-ranging issues that Celtic will need to deal with? Do you think it will take a while for us to repair this damage?
Yeah, well, it'll take a while to repair the relationship between whatever board is in place and the Celtic fans, I think, because you can point the finger as much as you want at Neil Lennon. Neil Lennon came into the job knowingly, obviously, without his own coaching staff, so he took the coaching staff, the team that was there. But there's so many things that don't seem right with regards to the board's Peter Lawwell's interference in the footballing side of things. I think there's too many things that I've heard now that are like, wait a minute, that's not right. That shouldn't be happening at a football club of our size. And at source, it's kind of, there's something wrong before you get further down the tree, so to speak. So I think there's in terms of people laughing at us, it seems absurd that we've just won 4 consecutive trebles. I mean, that is an unbelievable achievement, and then people go, but you didn't have any competition. Yes, we did. We had competition all through that time. It's just that they weren't very good, and we beat them every time we played them, or more often than not. And even when we did get beat off them, we won the games that mattered and won enough of the games that mattered to get the trophies at the end of it. So I totally refute this, there was no competition, and just because suddenly there's a challenge. There's a challenge because they've got a steady ship that hasn't been really interrupted. They've played away. I watched the game against Motherwell. I didn't see that much that made me think, oh, this is an absolute flying machine. Do you know what I mean? It's just that we are completely off the rails at the moment, and we're struggling to get anywhere near back to the track. Kevin Graham's analogy.
Are we allowed to make an analogy? If Kev's not on the show?
No, it's copyrighted, so at least I've inserted that caveat as a word that's used often these days. But yeah, I think there's going to be a disconnect until the fans, the majority of the fans, see a change in the professionalism of the team and the club. Really.
Oh, definitely. I'm going to compare it to a couple of the managerial appointments and demises that we've witnessed over the last 20 odd years. Now, Patrick Murphy comes in to say, through the lack of action, the board is giving the impression that 20 points behind is acceptable. It doesn't appear they will sack Neil Lennon, and I predict he's here until the end of the season. There's a lot of fans who agree with you, Patrick. I think back to when Brendan Rodgers came in a blaze of glory, and the whole thing's getting streamed live on Celtic TV, and 13,000 fans are at the stadium, and nobody at that moment in time didn't want Brendan Rodgers in charge of Celtic, that's for sure. But what he was taking over from Ronnie Deila, which was completely different. It was a completely different set of circumstances than when Martin O'Neill took over from, I'm going to say, John Barnes. I know Barnes had left much earlier. He took over from Dalglish effectively, but the Barnes and Dalglish dream team, as the Celtic View called it. So when O'Neill took over, JP, Celtic were shambolic. If we think back to that season, and I've looked at it in some depth over the last year, particularly when I was speaking to Barnesy in that interview that we managed to do probably about a year ago now. But when I look at the job that Martin O'Neill did, he came into the club when we really needed so much to change. You looked at the dressing room, you looked at the way that season had gone, the way that a number of the players hadn't really taken to John Barnes, and Barnes has spoken to him about that himself, as has some of the players like Craig Burley. I remember the story I got told by Big Stubbsy was that, and again, I'd need to check where they were in terms of where the destination was, but they were on some kind of break, and there was maybe a couple of games here and there. I think it was a Scandinavian country, if memory serves me right. But John Barnes obviously was a manager at this time. Tommy Johnson, Alan Stubbs, and Craig Burley, and I think Jackie McNamara were there, and they'd gone out in the afternoon, and they were in a restaurant stroke bar cafe place, and Barnes didn't trust them. This is the feeling that the players got. Barnes didn't trust them to go out on their own and behave. So he had gone out himself as well, looking for his team, just like spying on them. Yeah, Big Brother's watching. And he's found them in this nice wee restaurant, and he's gone in, and Tommy Johnson was drinking lemonade. And Barnes has walked up to the table, he's picked the drink up and actually taken a drink out of it to make sure it wasn't alcohol. And the group of players at that stage, this was definitely a winter trip now that I look at it, because you look at the form after it. It wasn't perfect before they went on the trip, JP, but it just fell to bits. And they all looked at each other and thought, this guy's not for us, Now, there isn't a meeting at that stage where they all say, right, we're not playing for the boss. But there's just something inside footballers, isn't there, where if you don't believe in the gaffer, or you think that they're undermining you as a professional, they're not going to give that 100% that perhaps they would have done. And I think that was a massive issue under Barnes, and he was never ever going to regain that.
Barnes as well was at our Tommy Burns supper the year before Neil Lennon was the guest. John Barnes came along as manager, and it was quite a coup, because I don't think they'd never had, apart from Tommy Burns, they'd never had a Celtic manager attend. So I was on the committee at the time, and I was in the little reading room, and John Barnes came into the reading room, and nobody could speak. Everybody was just like, John Barnes. You've got to remember, this is before the whole, there's about a month and a half before the Inverness Cali thing. And so he's the Celtic manager. He's John Barnes, ex of England, New Order, World in Motion, all of that. And everybody's of an age to know. Well, I hope maybe not everybody watching this is of an age to know that particular single. But John Barnes comes in, and everybody was kind of like, nobody approached him, and I just walked up to him and went, "All right, John, I'm John Paul. I'm one of the committee members. Pleased to meet you." And he went, "Oh, John Paul Gaultier. How you doing?"
That impression's far too accurate, JP. I've got to say, far too accurate.
I didn't know what to wear, so I thought, I'll wear a tie. So I had this really loud tie on, and he was brilliant. He stood up and he spoke in front of the crowd and told everybody how proud he was to be Celtic manager, and I believe he was. It's just that, like you say, he probably had, by that point, lost a good part of the dressing room. And in that trip that you're talking about, probably only the month before, because this was January 2000. So, yeah, I mean, I guess once a part of that group, and if it's an influential part of a group, sort of tune out of the manager's way of thinking, or think that he's not going to be, taking the club forward in any way, then it's probably, sadly, the end of the line.
It's irreparable, isn't it? I mean, obviously Barnes was able to move on Craig Burley, but you can't move on half a dozen experienced, influential players, because that's the heartbeat of your team. But the reason I brought that up is I feel that we're moving into the realms of what we do next as a board, what we do next as a club, it's at that level, because we had, I think, I'd need to check this, we had lost the league by 21 points when Martin O'Neill came in. Yeah. We had lost the league. Obviously, when Brendan Rodgers came in, I'm not taking anything away from what Rodgers did at Celtic, we were the league winners. We were dominating Scottish football. Yes, we had only won the league, JP, the previous season under Ronnie Dyler, having won the double the previous season before that. But I think it's far more of a scenario where we need a manager to come in and make the impact that O'Neill did, whereby he's actually got a fragmented squad. He's got expensive players who have come in and not done it for him. I mean, I'm not comparing Raphael to Barkas, but, Martin O'Neill had a £5 million dud in the dressing room that you had to do something with. And by the way, I don't think anybody's going to get a tune out of Barkas now. I've seen enough. So I think the task that the Celtic board has now is as big a task as they had after the Barnes and Dalglish period at the club. So you've got a group of players with undoubted talent within that group, JP, but there is going to have to be a turnaround in terms of staff. You're going to have to get rid of quite a few of them, bring in your own men, massive investment. But that's what's going to be required to turn around this 20-point deficit. If indeed it is going to finish 20 points,
Well, let's not, as somebody said last night, that the rock bottom is still to come, and I really, really hope that is not the case, because we've reached a nadir that I didn't think was even possible this season, But we're here and we're living through it, and you've got to take the bad times with the good. It's always been the case that there's no sweet without sour, and it's just one of those things where, yes, we've enjoyed unbridled success in the last few years that none of us could have ever possibly thought could happen. 2 trebles on the spin was considered ridiculous. 3 mental. 4, beyond the realms of thinking. No one could ever have thought in their lifetime they would see us playing 4 trebles. 4, back in the days when we were younger upstarts watching Celtic in the 90s, if you'd have said to us after walking out Ibrox that day when McStay missed the penalty, "Oh, don't worry, see in about 26 years time you'll be winning 4 trebles in a row," you'd have been like, "No way is that going to happen. In what circumstances can that possibly happen?" But,
I know,
but we've lived through it and it's happened, and now we just have to dust ourselves down that the decisions made by the club and the aftermath of the third treble unfortunately have been the wrong ones, I think, because a few people have said the players got used to Brendan Rodgers and his style of coaching, and then you bring in somebody on a permanent basis that's completely different to that, and it's just, and the games, as Kev said, the game's moved on. and we have to kind of move on with it. And I love Neil Lennon. I said that at the start of the show, and I told you my history with, my experiences with him and supporting him, but it just doesn't seem to be the right fit anymore, and I hate saying that. I really hate saying that.
It's interesting because we do get fans of other clubs joining the podcast, and as long as they're contributing, JP, that's great in a positive way. But again, going back to the humour element, when you and I are talking, and we were there and we've seen games back in the dark old days, inevitably it will be mentioned from time to time because it's your point of reference. But one big thing was this sense of humour, and even last night looking at Facebook once I eventually got home, because by God that was a late finish last night, only Neil Lennon during a blizzard wouldn't use a Yeti on the bench, and you're just thinking we can still laugh at ourselves. It was brilliant. I don't know who came up with that, but Paul Cockwell is a Hibs fan. Lennon done exactly the same thing at Hibs, blamed everyone except himself. Now we do have a journalist coming in for one of the other shows on a regular basis. I say coming in, he's dialing in obviously, but he worked pretty closely with Neil Lennon when he was at Hibs. So he's analysed how that started, how the period at Easter Road started and how it unravelled, and there are some similarities, JP, whereby there is this kind of siege mentality. Everybody's against us, and it wasn't just because he was a Hibs, the Celtic manager, that was his mentality. It was exactly the same when he was at Hibs. He thought the media were against him. He started, he stopped speaking to the media. He was sending Gary Parker to do his press conferences and his pre-matches. He was falling out with fellow managers on the sidelines. You'll remember the Jim Duffy situation. He was calling out referees. So we have seen this, and we know how it ended at Hibs. It didn't end well. It came to the point where there was a massive falling out on the training pitch with Canberry. Was it Florian Canberry? He had a short spell at Rangers. Everybody knows the story, don't they? And that obviously then spilled into a meeting that he had with Leanne Dempster, and he was relieved of his duties. Now, are we going down that road? You were saying that we've not hit rock bottom yet. Is there still an incident? Is there still a drama? I wouldn't put anything past this Celtic side this season, and Neil Lennon in particular.
That's true. I guess it would depend on results. I mean, we desperately need to win. Whether it's Neil Lennon in the dugout or whoever else in the dugout next week, we need to win that game. It was like last night. I was getting texts, calling out the unprofessionalism of Neil Lennon from a friend, saying, banning Sky and this, that, and the next thing. It's not becoming him a Celtic manager. And my reply was, it was as the game had started, and I said, I don't care about any of that right now. I care about Celtic playing this game and winning, and that was all I cared about. Everything else goes out as soon as the whistle goes. All of that kind of goes out the window, and you're just wanting the team to get a result. So, we just have to hope that there's no extenuating circumstances, that we have, a full strength, a lot fitter full strength squad to pick from next week when we play Hamilton. It is Hamilton, isn't it? On Wednesday?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
At home or away?
At home.
Oh, at home. Right. Okay. Right. So that is strange. That's the first game, as I told you before, the first Celtic game I ever saw was Hamilton at home in September '88.
Big high scoring game, was it?
2-1.
What was it? Because remember, we beat them like 7-2 and all that, 8-1 a few times around about that season.
2-1, but I mean that's a repeat of my first game. But yeah, so I mean, we just have to, take it a game at a time throughout this absolutely absurd season, absurd time of our lives. That doesn't show any signs of abating anytime soon, with the lockdown further extended and all that. So. Yeah, I mean, it's just I just keep everybody away and keep everything as much in house as possible. Only speak when needed to. If I was him, I would try and repair any damage to Sky, either off the record or on the record, because it just seems silly to be going down that road with banning or trying to ban outlets from press conferences and stuff like that. It's still. I mean, I have no love for the other side of the city, but it embarrasses me that they've got that ongoing situation with BBC. It's like when you see Sports Scene and it's just like the text from the Rangers manager. And we've seen that now from 3 managers, Kajinja, Murty and Gerrard. And it's only been text responses. And you're just like, how have they not resolved that? That's been going on for what? more than 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. See, the thing with that as well, my concern, again, looking at it quite deep, no man is an island. You know, you can't burn every single bridge, JP. Yeah. You just can't do it. So that's a concern, because you're burning bridges with the Ferencvaros comments with players. You're going against some of the club's wishes, because he spoke about the Sky Sports thing, yet Ryan Christie and El Yunusi yesterday were interviewed by Sky Sports. So there's people at the club who have got a much bigger say in what goes on than Neil Lennon. So, you know, he's going against members of Celtic Football Club, players, the media, his friends and ex-colleagues, officials. It's like it's a scattergun approach, and everybody's getting it.
Yeah, I think he should. I mean, it's very, very easy for us to sit and procrastinate over what someone should or shouldn't do in his position. I understand the guy is under immense pressure. Of course he is. Like, you know, there's so many reasons for that. But if I was him, calming down after I know what it's like to isolate, by the way. It's horrible just having to sit in and not be able to go anywhere, not even able to go outside to do anything. I had to do that when I came back from France last year for 2 weeks, and it was absolutely brutal. So I know the frustration, and perhaps going straight into a press conference after being in that confined environment was not a good idea, especially for someone with the character of Neil Lennon, who's, you know, he did go a bit Tony Montana on people.
I was waiting for another impression there.
No. Why did feed me? But I can do that. I can actually do an alright, you know, but I'm not going to do it now. What I was going to say, yeah. So coming out like I think calming down, he should make a phone call to Andy Walker and be like, "Look, I don't agree with what you said, you know, and that's why I've called you out about it." And I don't know what his relationship's like with Andy Walker. I don't even know if he speaks to the guy or has spoken to the guy before, but certainly with John Hartson as well. I think he is stuck in his craw that Hartson didn't phone him and say, "By the way, I'm going to say this in the media," or "I'm going to say this on a podcast," or whatever. And, you know, and Neil Lennon must have found out about it through the media. So I think he needs to repair that, because, you know, you don't want to lose friends over this. It's not that sort of situation where you lose people that you've shared a bond with, you know, been in the trenches with, you know, because Neil Lennon and John Hartson saw some pretty good action together in their time on a football pitch, and I'd hate to think that would be a ruined relationship over this, do you know?
What a words. No, you're right. You're spot on. I'm going to leave people with a slight positive, JP. I'm going to try my best here, right? Mm-hmm. Now, Zinko Vix, who comes in and out quite regularly, so it's good to see you again. Your avatar looks like Apocalypse Now, which is quite, you know, that's probably appropriate at the moment. So you're commenting on YouTube, and you've made a few comments in relation to Benitez, and people keep saying every time you pull a big name out the hat, he would never come to Celtic, we would never invest in that individual. I'm going to throw a nice wee positive end to the broadcast. Now, this story about CVs in the drawer, right? Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Celtic did not only speak to Neil Lennon for that manager's job. And one of the managers that they did speak to, and it was progressing, but obviously it didn't come to fruition, was Benitez. Mm-hmm. Right, so that did happen. Now, he's now in the Chinese Super League, making millions and millions. I don't know what his salary is, something absolutely obscene. But I think when you're looking at somebody like Benitez and the other manager who's gone over there recently, Slaven Bilic, Bilic is there until an English team wants him back. You know, it's just a stepping stone. There's no way you're going there because you have got some kind of ambition that you're going to be able to achieve whilst you're in the Chinese Super League. No disrespect. That's not going to happen, JP, right? So Bilic will get offered a job at some point, I would guess, back in at the English game. Rafa Benitez, what would prize him away from China? Would it be a club who you would expect to be able to qualify for some stage of the Champions League? And I say that because I don't take that as a given either, because obviously we've not done all that well, even as champions, over the last few seasons. But yeah, it's always going to be someone with access to the Champions League, isn't it?
So would Benitez be someone that comes? I'm not saying he would. I just want to drop that little dose of positivity in there to say that Celtic were in discussions with Rafa Benitez when Neil Lennon got the job. Why did Peter Lawwell say that he was the only guy? Well, he's going to have to back up his man, isn't he? He couldn't exactly come out and say Neil Lennon was the second choice.
Well, I think it creates a bit of... I think he was probably trying to create a bit of kind of folklore, or not folklore, but like just create a bit of mystique and kind of like go, oh, well, you know, there's no other man for the job. We had a bunch of CVs, but we just chucked them in the bin, and I've just been into the shower there to give him the job, you know, and it was, everybody was caught up in that moment. And, you know, I don't think, with the greatest of respect to Peter Lawwell, that getting caught up in the moment is something that a CEO should be doing. You know, it should be something that's a lot more calculated than that. And yes, there was elements of the fans that were happy with that appointment. And I agreed with you at the time. I remember you saying, well, how could you not give the guy the job? And I still stand by that, because at the time I was like, okay, this is working. You know, he's come in, he's galvanised the squad and the team. Why wouldn't he be given the job? You know, but then when you actually like analyse his managerial record and put it up against Brendan Rodgers' record, as a sort of, you know, downwards choice from what it was before.
By the way, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we're going to go and try and get Rafa Benitez. I'm just giving an idea of the fact that there are managers out there. And I think that the term elite is used quite loosely these days, JP, but there are managers. I think Benitez is an elite manager, incidentally, what he's won over various countries and in Europe. So there are managers out there who would be able to implement elite practices at Celtic Football Club. Get us back to a standard that I think most Celtic fans enjoyed under Brendan Rodgers. So who's the next Celtic manager going to be? Well, they need to make the decision first, and Neil Lennon's still in charge. So, will he still...
About the elite manager part is that it's all very well there being a lot of elite managers, but it has to be the exact right fit, because you only have to look across the other side of the city, and a certain Mr. Paul Le Guen. Was he considered an elite manager when he came in? I would argue yes, given his achievements with... it was Leon, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And it didn't work out there because, you know, he came into an environment where you had people more interested in eating bags of Monster Munch and whatnot than you know, healthy meals. So I you know, it's not. You know, there could be a whole host of elite managers that are out there, but it has to be the exact right fit, and the homework has to be done. And going by the homework that was done with recruitment in terms of the likes of Shane Duffy, I'm terrified at the prospect of, you know, I think we got lucky with Brendan Rodgers, and I think, you know, anybody that comes in now, it needs to be, you know, a thorough
process, recruitment process.
A thorough recruitment process, and a thorough study on that person's character and their history, because, you know, we can't make a mistake here. Whatever happens next, whatever it's going to be and whenever it's going to be, because obviously something will change at some point. We don't know when that's going to be, but whatever the next move is, it has to be the right one.
No, you're absolutely right. Now, JP, it's been it's always a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on the show on a weekly basis. But even during these difficult times, JP, we can get a laugh and we can talk about the good old days as well. But there's loads of good days to come for Celtic supporters. There always is. Thanks everybody for getting involved on Twitter, Facebook, and also on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube. All that's left for me to say is, JP Mason, once again, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.